This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Well, hello and welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southridge, and with me is Pastor Scott, our lead pastor here. And we want to let you know that if you have not liked or subscribed to this podcast, make sure to do that so that way you don't miss out on anything new. But we did start a new series on Sunday called No Offense. So, Pastor Scott, to get us started, why don't you just share with us a little bit more about what we can expect throughout this series?
Yeah, so in this series, what we're trying to do is, as the people of God, we're trying to learn how to live unoffended. And I know that it probably seems like an impossible task, but I mean, what doesn't seem impossible about the life that Christ has called us to live, to be honest? Like, if any of it were only just up to us, it would all be impossible. But since it's not just all up to us, then this is a very attainable goal. And it's really, I mean, it's the way that Jesus lived his life. I mean, he wasn't going around with all these people that bothered him or interrupted him or disagreed with him or did things that, you know, in his humanity probably frustrated him. Like, oh, come on, why would you do that? He didn't go around offended ever. Like, it was just the same. And then, like, so for us, we go, well, that's actually what we're supposed to be like. We don't get a pass just because, you know, we don't get a pass. If Jesus lived unoffended, then that is our goal. And so that's what we're learning how to do. But the keys of how to do it have a lot more to do with perception than anything else. So we started this past week with looking at God and looking at ourselves. That's the good starting point. And Sunday was probably one of those days that a lot of people were listening to the sermon and going, oh, I wish so-and-so was listening to this. Because that's how a lot of people listen to sermons, which is why most people are totally unaffected by their church attendance or anything else, is because they always think everything else is for someone else. And so if that's how you listen to the sermon was, oh, man, I wish my mom heard this, or I wish my husband or my wife, wish my kids, I wish that lady at work heard this, or whatever it was. If that's how you listen to it, then you missed out on the whole thing. Because the first step in living unoffended is finally seeing ourselves as God sees us, which is true biblical humility. Like, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself as God sees you.
Yeah.
And the way that God sees us, in one sense, like before Christ, is that we are that debtor that I talked about on Sunday. And our debt of sin is so much worse than we will ever give ourselves credit for. And that's not because of of what it was that you did, but because of who it was against.
Yeah.
That's what people miss about this. That's why people are like, oh, but like my sin's not as bad as their sin. It's like, no, but it's who it was ultimately against is the bigger issue when it comes to your sin. That's really, if you'll see it that way, then you can see yourself properly. And like most of the stuff that we get offended on, actually all the stuff that we get offended by, is all stuff that we've been guilty of in one way or another. So you get offended over someone's sin. Well, you're not sinless, so who are you to be offended over that? You get, let's say that you feel strongly about some current social issue going on. Well, that other person very well may be wrong, but so you've been wrong before as well.
Right.
So again, who are you to be offended when you don't have a perfect track record? The only way that you can live offended, and I said this on Sunday, is by taking a superior stance to someone else, which is not Christian whatsoever. And that doesn't matter what that sin is. And I know for some of us, we got these little pet projects and these things that we feel super passionate about. But your stuff is not any more important than anyone else's stuff. And one sin is not more heinous in this sense that I'm talking about than another. And so that's like, we have to see ourselves properly. But the other part of Sunday that I'm hoping people heard But sometimes when a message is really hard to receive, we'll miss the thing that actually helps us take it the right way, and that's not just seeing ourselves properly as the debtor, the one, but as also being able to see God properly as the king in the story, the one who is standing there willing to forgive this unbelievable debt. And if he would do that for you, why would you not do that for someone else? So at the moment that you can see yourself properly, then you'll be able to see God properly, and then being offended really doesn't become that hard not to become offended when you go like, oh, well, I'm guilty of everything that offends me. God loved me and forgave me despite the fact of how offensive I've been, so why wouldn't I just live that way in regards to other people? So that was step one. What else we're going to get into in this series? This week we're going to talk about how we need to see people the way that God sees them. So this time we are going to put our eyes on other people. But see, when we're trying to be critical of someone, it needs to be ourselves. So again, if you were listening to Sunday going, oh, I wish Bill would have heard this. No, this week's for Bill. But it's not going to be for you judging Bill. It's going to be for you realizing that you're supposed to love Bill.
Yep.
Yeah, despite. And we talked about this a lot in our meeting that we just got out of. Being able to understand where someone is coming from and the pain that they have experienced that you are not privileged to know can help you understand where they've been and where they're coming from in a way to where you go, okay, I'm not going to become offended by that because this is what's going on there. There's always hidden pain in people that you have no clue about. And so we're going to talk about seeing, but God sees that pain. And God always steps in. God will step in those situations. And so we're going to talk about that. One of the weeks that we're going to talk about is, and I've actually, this is something that book Unoffendable by Brant Hansen called out. Like, I've been guilty of this, of talking about something called righteous anger.
Yeah.
And I probably just heard that from somewhere else and was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But there is no such thing as righteous anger. There's nowhere in the scriptures that talks about anger in a positive way. Although, like, good, well-meaning preachers and things like that will go like, oh, no, anger is only bad if you let it make you do bad stuff. It's like, that's not actually the case. Anger is always going to lead to negative consequences. Or if you just become angry, then you, like we talked about Sunday, you'll be less likely to go and do anything. So we're going to debunk the fact that anger is not a fruit of the Spirit.
Right.
In fact, in the New Testament, there's these big lists of like virtues and vices. Anger always shows up on the vice list, never on the virtue list. Yeah. So if there was a good kind of anger, don't you think that the Lord would have put it in the virtue list? But it's not there because ultimately anger never leads to the desired outcome. Even what we've been told is righteous anger will ultimately not lead to the proper outcome. It'll probably just lead to more and more sin and more offense than anything else. The final week, I don't fully know where we're headed yet. In the final week, I've been toying around with like an application week where I just preach a really offensive message and see if anyone gets offended by it, to see if anybody's been listening. I don't think that I'm going to do that, but that would certainly be fun.
Maybe that's a Mother's Day. I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
that might only be fun for me though. But no, I really do want to get into this idea that like stop talking about stuff and actually go and do stuff.
Yeah.
Like if you were nearly as upset about stuff as you say that you are, you would be an advocate of making the world better and not just sitting there complaining online about it. Because, and I said it Sunday, the people that are actually changing the world are far too busy to be tweeting about it. They're out there actually doing it. Like, it's always like, when we were growing up in school, people always told you, if someone ever tells you that they're going to fight you, you don't ever have to worry about it because all they want to do is talk and make people think that they're going to fight you. You'll know that someone's going to fight you when they come up and punch you in the face. Right? That's just how it goes. Like, if all you ever do is say that you're going to fight someone, you ain't going to fight nobody. Right. But you go up and punch somebody in the face, you're in the middle of the fight. That's what's going on right here. All these people that just want to sit here and talk and talk and talk and talk, they're never going to do anything. They're not going to back it up.
Right.
because the people that are going to back it up are already out there doing it. They don't have to
Yeah.
go and tell everybody.
And then I think, though, by the time someone's doing it and doing it well, like what they're posting is about what they're doing,
Yeah.
like about this good act that they're doing to help fix that thing, not what should be done,
Yeah.
but what is happening.
Oh, yeah.
Because I look at things like the A1 campaign and like those kind of organizations that are doing this really cool, great stuff with human trafficking and things.
Yeah.
They're not just out there saying how bad human trafficking is. They are actually doing things to help that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's incredibly
That's not coming
important.
from an offended place either. That's
Right.
coming from a place it's
Yes.
I care about this.
Yes.
I don't want people to think that like when we say we're living unoffended, it doesn't mean that we just take a laissez-faire attitude and now I just don't care about anything. No. It means like the stuff that you really do, because God has instructed us to care about things.
Yes.
You care about things deeply. It
Yeah.
means that I'm not just going to talk about it and be upset about it. I'm going to go and do something about it.
Yeah.
That's what all this is about, is like just stop talking about it and do something about it. Like if you're upset about the homeless issue down in Charleston or the drug issue, why don't you just go do something about it? Like, stop talking about it, like, and actually be about it.
Yeah.
And that ultimately, because all the offendedness in the world will never make it a better place. And we've seen that. We live in the most offended culture that's ever existed because everybody has a voice now because of the internet, and things are getting worse, not better. And so if we would just stop being offended and go get to work, we could actually make things better.
Yeah. And I think like that brings to mind, because we are hyper aware of things because of the way that we live with the constant connection that we have digitally, the constant in the know about things that like years ago, it would take you a long time to hear about some of these issues, some of these things that are happening. It's not that they weren't happening. It's not that it wasn't a problem then. It's that we are just now so aware compared to what we used to be, that it makes us feel like this sense of, well, I can't believe this is still going on, or I can't believe this is happening, or like whatever. But it's like, you know what? Like, it's been happening. It's been going on. Where were you then? But I think like in this culture, why do you think it is so hard for people to live in this way of being unoffended? Like, what's something that you think is a key contributor to that?
Because there's a built-in reward in our culture for people that are offended. Like, other people pat them on the back. Like, if you go out, like, I saw this a couple times last week, and it was so frustrating for me, like, to watch people, like, complain about different things that they're not, like, and I said, complainers are never contributors. They complain about stuff that they're not a part of whatsoever, and then beneath this social media post is 25 comments praising what was said. So now we have all of this action that never leaves a comment thread, and nothing is ever actually done. No new understanding was brought. No challenge was brought. It's just like ignorant people get on the internet and say whatever they want, and they will always find more ignorant people. And I don't mean ignorant in the fact that they're dumb. I mean, there's most of the things that people try to talk about, they don't know what's going on. So when we try to criticize local government, you don't know what's going on. When you try to criticize your kid's school, you don't know what's going on.
Right.
When you try to criticize the local little league or football league or basketball league or gymnastics gym, whatever, whenever you want to try to criticize one of those, if you're not actively involved in it, you don't actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? You have no clue what's going on. You want, like, unless you are on the, like, a contributor at a church, you don't know why churches make the decisions that they do or do the things that they do. So therefore, as one that is not involved in it, then you should not say anything about it, because there's always more going on in these people and places that you are critical of than you'll ever come to understand from the outside. Because as an outsider, there's information that's not for you. And so that's like, it's so hard because everybody gets a voice now, and everybody finds their own little audience, but everyone is with access to as much information as we've ever had in human history, and we're still ignorant of so many things that we want to talk about. And because you're just going to keep getting patted on the back every time you come out with your outrage, that it's just going to make you do it again and again and again. And that's why it's so hard to live unoffended, because actually when you live unoffended, nobody cheers you on for that. In fact, it looks like weakness.
Yeah.
It looks like, oh, you're just going to let everyone get over on you. You're not going to say anything about that. You're not going to stand up for that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, I don't think that I have to sit here and comment on everything that happens. Like, and again, this is not
You'll be much happier if you don't.
Again, it's not like, hey, just sit back and watch injustice happen.
No.
It's like, no, if something horrible happens, yes, speak out, but let that drive you to action.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that something horrible happens in my community and I'm just going to sit there quietly and watch it happen and say, well, I don't really know what's going on. No, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, you don't pick your fights, man.
Yeah.
Like, everything is not worth tweeting about. Everything is not worth fighting about. Like, you have to have hills that you will die on, and there are just the older that I get, the more I realize like those hills are few and far between of the fights that I want to find myself in. Like, what do I care what that person says about this topic? And the more that you just come to know more and different types of people, you just go, you know what, that person that disagrees with me, they're not they don't think that they're being immoral, even if they have a different view on something than me, and that I think maybe that's an immoral view. That doesn't they don't see it like that. So I don't have to demonize that person because they could be operating out of their own ignorance. And a conversation with that person would be far more helpful than just going, oh, well, you're an idiot, just write you off, and I'm offended by everything you say, and then I got to sit here and fight with you for no reason whatsoever. Like, I love arguing with people. I do. I like setting people straight because most people never know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Megan hates arguing with me because she says, you literally do this for a living. Because that's what preaching is. Every single week, I'm getting up trying to argue something to get you to see it how I see it. It's the way you'll bring your life into alignment with God's word. So she doesn't like arguing with me whatsoever because she's like, I'm not good at arguing. You're really good at arguing. I love arguing. And there's been times over the last 10 years that I've had to just unfollow people on social media because I could not resist the urge to just sit there and be like, whoa, wait a second, have you thought about this? Have you done that? And all it ever did was get me in these unnecessary fights, ruin my witness, and then ultimately I'm all anxious and tore up about something that I can't even do anything. There's no end to the conversation online.
Yeah.
There's no end to it. And so it's just something that goes on and on and on and on. And so I just have these tore up feelings. And then the next time I see that person's picture or they post something else, automatically my heart just gets angry and I'm ready to lash out again over nothing. And it was you know what? I've just got to pick my battles.
Absolutely.
And you got to pick your mediums better. Listen, the internet is not the right place.
Yeah.
Sit down and have a conversation with somebody. If you're really trying to help somebody out, sit down and have a conversation with them. Don't send them a text message. Yeah. Don't comment on their Facebook post. Have a conversation with them and go, hey, I don't know if you know this or not, but I wanted to let you in on this. Or hey, I don't understand why you said this. Could you help me understand where you're – have a conversation with someone. And the minute that you are fully in the know, that will help you so much with not being offended.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important because I remember a situation, I don't know, a couple of years ago or so, and there was a thing on, social media that got out of hand, and I ended up just calling one of the individuals involved, and had a conversation, and that person was like, you are completely right. I am sorry that I acted that way, that I said those things, but had I continued on social media, it would have just kept going unless someone blocked someone or whatever. But even then they end up posting on their regular thing and keeping it going in that way. But it's one of those things where you really have to choose and choose wisely.
Yeah.
Like, I think it takes a level of discernment. It takes a level of understanding to know, okay, are these people just uneducated in this area? Are they, finding out the why? We were talking about this in our meeting, and I love when somebody says that they agree, like think differently in some way to me, or like don't believe in a certain thing. I love to just ask them why. Like, well, why do you believe that way? Like, just because if you don't know why they believe something that they believe, you're never going to know how to come at that in a way that could potentially help educate them or steer them in the right direction. Like, on a Sunday when you're preaching and teaching, like, you don't know how every single person in the room or that is watching online thinks about something. You're coming to it from the basis of the word and from God and the Holy Spirit, like what you know to be true in those things, and sharing that with them. But it's up to us in those moments to hear it, and instead of just saying, okay, I'm not going to listen to this because I don't agree, or I think that's offensive, or whatever, like, hearing it and trying to understand, okay, how does this really apply in my life? How can I take what is being said, and even if I don't fully agree with it, like, how can I view it in such a way that it could potentially help in some way, in some manner?
Yeah. I'm speaking at a conference this weekend, and what they asked me to speak on is how to preach in a world of social chaos. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about is exactly what you were saying. Is I can, like, and this is what good preachers do. This is not what mediocre preaching will ever do. Good preachers always exegete their culture to the way they understand what the culture is thinking. So whenever I go in my sermon, I go, well, I know what you're thinking. It's because I've heard it. I've been in that conversation. I've been there, done that. I don't like, and so if you can't show every side of an argument when you go in to preach, then you're not doing your job as a preacher whatsoever. So that's what I'm trying to do every weekend, is I'm trying to already know the objections of those that are on the fringes, those that don't see stuff like me, so that way I can counter their objections. What really weak preaching does is go, this is what the Bible says, get over it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's that level of knowing your audience and knowing the culture, and if we look back, at the original writings, like the original letters to the churches, they were writing to those churches in such a way they knew what the culture was. They knew what was going on and what the views or the other teachings or the things were, to be able to write to them in the way that they needed to hear to, dismantle some of those false teachings or false thinking. And so, and that's what good preachers do today. It's
if you don't understand your culture, you cannot reach it whatsoever. And it has to mean enough to you in our day and age to be educated on the culture. And I think we get most of the people that preach right now were raised in a version of Christianity that was all about isolation, where the culture is bad, stay away from the culture, and most of them still try to preach that, and then they wonder why it is that they cannot affect the culture around them whatsoever. It's because they have no access to it whatsoever. They were raised in isolationism, where they just go like, no, we're going to go to the Christian version of this, and we're going to go to the Christian version of this. We're going to go to the Christian version of this. And I'm not saying that at some level that's not okay and appropriate, because I'm not saying that we should just go and like throw our kids and our families all up into the secular mess, and just hope and pray everything comes out okay. But I'm saying that isolationist like way of doing living of really like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was like it is what has birthed this group of preachers and pastors now that are so out of touch with their culture, and then they sit there and scratch their head and they complain about the culture, but they cannot affect it because they don't understand it in the least bit. They don't know what's on the radio right now. They don't know what people are watching, and they're like, well, I would never watch that. And I'm not saying go and do stuff that's spiritually damaging for you, but you have to care enough to be able to speak their language. Like, do you understand the leading philosophies in the culture, and not just what somebody told you the leading philosophies are, but like, have you gone and listened? Have you read about them? Do you know why people are into this? And that level of coming to a mutual understanding about something, it doesn't mean that it's going to change your mind.
Right.
It just means that you love that other person well enough to be prepared to try and understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they tend to take that whole like don't be of the world thing to an extreme, but not realizing we're still supposed to be in the world, like
Yeah.
and going about them and being around them and that kind of thing, and understanding that if you're not immersed in it in some way, you can't reach them. I think
Yeah.
our youth pastor Anna does this extremely well of knowing what teen culture is into, knowing what they're doing, knowing what whatever, to be able to speak into those things. And that's something that, like, I remember several years ago before y'all hired her and you asked me about maybe transitioning, I really thought, like, I don't know that I can do that at the level that I can reach teens as effectively as what somebody else could. It's just not, like, I'm not great at that. Like, I do this to some extent and some level. But there are certain groups where I'm just like, I don't know, like sports stuff. I can't talk to you about sports. I don't know. It's not in my interest. Now, if that were something that I would need to know for something that I was speaking about, then sure, I would figure it out. I would find it out. But like, I think that knowing that level of what you can do. We were talking in my group last night about how we are all on like our own faith journey. Like we're all at it at different levels, at different places, and what might not be good for me, even though it may not be a terrible thing, but it might be something that I just know that I'm not supposed to do in the moment.
Yeah.
Might be just fine for somebody else in that time frame. And understanding and realize, like you said on Sunday, you said why we expect sinners, like people who are not believers and followers of Jesus Christ, to not sin is crazy thinking.
Yeah.
Like
the people outside the church really don't bother me that much.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, it's the people inside the church that bother me greatly. I'm very unoffended by people that want nothing to do with Christianity, just doing whatever they want.
Yeah.
For me, it's the people inside the church, which, and again, we've talked about this multiple times. I feel like the message or the calling that God has given me is specifically towards the religious crowd.
Yeah.
And because I feel that certain calling, I actually do really good with the irreligious crowd as well, because they also have an issue with the religious crowd.
Yeah.
So like those are like my people, and then like I'm trying to help people come out of religion and into true faith in a relationship with Jesus, and actually learn what it means to follow Jesus rather than just check a bunch of boxes. But that path is super messy.
Yeah, and I think that scares a lot of people. Like a lot of people have a problem because they worry. I've heard this before of like, oh, well, if you get around them, that it's easier to be pulled down than to pull someone up. And it's like this fear of I'm not confident in my own beliefs. I don't have enough conviction for my own beliefs to be able to still hear what other people are saying about other beliefs and other things to like it's going to sway me in some way.
Yeah, it's laziness.
Like I have enough conviction in my own faith and beliefs that I can hear about other religions and other teachings and other whatever, and it's not going to sway me.
No.
Like it's important to know those things so that way you can speak into those things. Like if you are going to go as a missionary and live in a totally different culture, you need to know what those people in that area believe, like what some of the teachings might be, so that way you can understand how to come into that space and know how to teach those things, teach them the right truth and the right things in the way that they can understand and comprehend. And it's the same thing here. Like it's the same thing wherever you are, is knowing that culture and those things. But let's get on the topic of grace, because grace really plays a huge role in this whole idea of being unoffended and coming at things in such a way that you would not be offended. So let's talk about how important it is to extend grace instead of being offended.
The only way you'll see yourself properly as that debtor is if you are 100% assured of this boundless grace. And that's what, like, people don't understand the amazing grace of God, so therefore they won't allow themselves to think of how bad they really are. Because like they have to think, oh, I'm just a little bit bad. That way God's grace will cover that little bit of badness or whatever it is. Like if you could ever begin to fathom the depths of God's love and grace for you, then you'll be able to feel comfortable saying, yes, I am blind, naked, pitiful, poor, and wretched. But that's okay because God's love is boundless, and there's no end to it. Like, if you could just begin to understand the depths and the breadth of His love and His grace, then you would feel just fine agreeing with Revelation 3:17 that you are an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
And the reason why most people treat God's grace as really, really fragile, and it's like this thing that like maybe we're going to run out, or maybe He's going to stop loving me. And it's like you have to see His grace properly, because then you'll feel more comfortable seeing yourself properly. When you can get both of those, then the more you go like, all right, I'm finally beginning to understand what it means to follow Jesus. And you go like, Jesus encountered nobody was on Jesus' level, right? If anyone ever had the right to be superior to one another, like to someone else, it was Jesus, and He didn't even do that. And so here we are just running around like feeling superior to other people. And it's like, well, wait a second, that's not even the example that we saw with Jesus. Right. And so like and I know religious people get really nervous about God's grace because they're always thinking someone's going to take advantage of it. The reason why is, ready for this? Because the religious people are always taking advantage of it. And that's why they're so afraid that the sinners are going to take advantage of God's grace, because they're out there doing it, you know. What is it? No, I'm not even going to tell that joke. Move on, Scott. Danger zone. Danger zone.
About to offend somebody.
Yeah, I was.
No, I think that it's so important, because here's the deal, is that like in the moments where we might be offended, in that moment, if we can just pause for a second and say, okay, is this a moment where I just need to extend some grace like that's been given me? It's so incredibly important. Last night in our group, we were talking like, okay, let's just like throw this out there to really just get our minds in the mode of like, how would we feel in this moment? Say you owe me, like my husband's asking the question. He's like, say that you owed me $10 million and it came time to pay. And I just came to you and I said, you know what? Don't worry about it. We're good. You don't owe me anything. It's like, what would you feel? And like, some of the answers were just like, I'd try to pay you something anyway, like no matter what, like whatever I had, I would try to give it. Like I would try to like come mow your lawn all the time, like, you know, something to continue to try, because we kind of got down to this idea of like, because we feel unworthy of that, like we don't feel like we deserve that.
Yeah,
but that is the whole message. That's the whole point of grace, is that like we don't, like there is nothing that we could actually do. Yeah. That could pay what was given.
Well, let me tell you
like,
what the Lord just told me when you just told that story. One of the reasons why we're always trying to pay God back is like if it were you that I owed money to, I would be like, oh well, I mean, Cheryl probably needs that money. You know, she's got rent, she's got cars, she's got kids. Yeah. We're thinking God needs something, and we're forgetting that the king in that story has an infinite amount of wealth, and so like. He doesn't need you to pay him anything. Yeah. That's how deep the grace of God is. He needs absolutely nothing from you. So that it's like that's like you can't offer this God anything whatsoever. On your best day, you did not do him a favor. He is good all by himself. The depths of that grace. So that king in that story is not like going, what a sacrifice it is to show you grace because I've only got so much. He pardoned that debt and didn't think a second about it because he has so much more, so much more. In fact, he has an infinite amount more. And so he didn't miss out on anything by giving it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good, because I think that's where, when I realized that at the point in my journey, when I realized that point that, like, he doesn't need anything from me, but how he sees me is of that, like, worth and value. Like, that's what changed so much for me, because I had gone through this, part of my life where I felt completely unworthy and undeserving. And it took knowing and realizing that aspect of it for things to kind of turn around and start changing for me, where I thought, okay, I'm good. Like, it's fine. Like, this is what he sees me, like who he sees me as. And I think that's an incredibly important moment for us. And as we begin to see ourselves in that light, then we can then start to do that for others. And I think that's where the shift for this coming week is going to be really important. And I hope that you will be here on Sunday if you're local, and if not, that you listen in. But make sure that you like and subscribe as we drop new content for the Extra Point every Wednesday. And we look forward to sharing more practical next steps with you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.